Welcome back to Half an Hour Hack. I'm your host, Joe Panzarino, alongside my co-hosts,
Matthew Danielsson.
I'm Brian Richardson.
We are really glad to have you guys here today because, boy, do we have a show for you. From previous episodes, we know how many different aspects of hacking there can be. So for today's episode, I'd like to go into detail about a type of hacking involving data breach. So basically, information being leaked, including confidential files, financial account data, and more. Let's get right into it, guys. On November 24th, 2014, a hacker group which identified itself by the name Guardians of Peace leaked confidential data from the film studio Sony Pictures. The data included personal information about Sony Pictures employees and their families, emails between employees, information about executive salaries at the company, copies of then unreleased Sony films, plans for future Sony films, scripts for certain films, and other information. Just basically absolutely gutted Sony Pictures, just took everything that they had and put it all out there for anyone to see. The perpetrators then used this type of malware called Wiper, which basically is used to wipe computers of any of its infrastructure. So they used that malware to effectively erase Sony's entire computer infrastructure. During the hack, the group demanded that Sony withdraw its then upcoming film, The Interview, which was supposed to be a comedy about a plot to assassinate North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and threaten terrorist attacks at cinema screenings for the film. After that, that was released to the public that was happening. Many major U.S. cinema chains, they kind of decided that it was probably in their best interest not to screen the film, whether it was to, make the public feel more calm about going to the movies, or if it was just to, for their own safety, they decided to opt out of screening The Interview in response to the threats. And Sony elected to cancel the film's formal premiere and their mainstream release, going to a release that was a little bit more low-key the next day. And then they also made it available on demand, and it's on Netflix, and it was just people can do it from the comfort of their own home. United States intelligence officials, after evaluating this entire software breach and evaluating the software, the techniques, and network sources used in the hack, they alleged that the attack was sponsored by the government of North Korea, which has since denied all responsibility. So right now, it's kind of up in the air as to who done it. Could it actually have been the North Korean government? They denied responsibility. So it's kind of still a mystery. I want to start off by asking you guys, do you remember this happening? Because I certainly do.
I have very vague thoughts about it. Like, I don't remember the hack initially, but I do remember the controversy that the movie The Interview brought, and a lot of people were like, "Oh, you can't see it in theaters. Like, it's almost dangerous to." And now that you've shown some light on it, it's like, oh, that makes sense that they really tried to get it like on demand and just out of the theaters. Like they still need to make money on the film, of course, but they don't want their patrons being absolutely terrified while watching this movie. So I do remember that massive controversy, and it was like, oh, this is gonna start up so much drama and so many like political arguments and everything. But I don't actually remember the hack, so it's very interesting.
I do, on the other hand. I remember, it wasn't, because we found out about the hack before the announcement of the confirming it was the Guardians of Peace and stuff, well, quote unquote, confirming it's the Guardians of Peace. And I remember that big skeletal thing with the quote of what they were demanding. I remember that pretty vividly because I was still in the military, as I've discussed in previous episodes, during the time of this hack, and it was really everything everyone was talking about, and it forced us into a lot of different new kind of how we dealt with stuff within the military. So for me, it's very much a hack I remember.
Yeah, I was a freshman in high school, and I was a bit of a movie guy. I still am a movie guy, but I just remember saying like, oh, like this movie, The Interview, like it's going to be hysterical. It's just the next, Seth Rogen comedy. Like who's not ready for that? And so I do remember that. And then I remember after hearing about the controversy, going back and then learning about like the initial data breach.
And I think it's interesting that once people finally started seeing the movie, and a ton of people thought it was hilarious. And I think if it wasn't as funny and it almost landed on the wrong foot, it could have
Yeah,
been a much bigger issue in the film industry and pretty much in any government, really.
definitely. Yeah, no, I was waiting for it to cross the line, and it never really did, like enough to cause the amount of controversy that it did. Like, had they just watched the movie, it's like, oh yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, like, oh, it's just another comedy.
Yeah, but I mean, with that said, having not seen the film, would you understand the motive of the breach?
If that is the only reason for the breach, because obviously there are other theories that it wasn't just about the interview.
Yeah.
If it was only about the movie, I understand the thought process is that, especially when we look at it from Kim Jong Un's thought process, as this is essentially Americans saying, "Hey, there's a plot to kill you, and we're
Yeah.
making a joke about it." So he could feel insulted by something like that. So I understand if that is the true reason behind the breach, but for me, that's definitely not the only reason. There had to be information they were looking for outside of just taking down the interview, because it's just a movie for most people.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I agree with you.
yeah, I agree with that too. But I'm also thinking that they definitely wanted something out of Sony, 100%. And I
Mhm.
think it's almost using the interview as
A
a
scapegoat.
facade. Yeah, yeah, as a
Yeah. Yep.
scapegoat. Extremely controversial movie. You need data from Sony, and you know that America and North Korea don't have the best relationship. So why don't you just try for your hack, go get Sony data, and then put it on? Oh, we're just trying to cancel the interview because
Mm-hmm.
we're anti that movie. And I think it's very coincidental that that movie came out and then that breach happened. So I think it was used as more of a scapegoat, uh, a
Actually,
facade, something like it's just to mask what they were really doing.
It
yeah, I
it could
100%
also
think
like
so.
not even be North Korea.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
You know,
Just
like
somebody
are
poking the
you?
bear.
Yeah, like what if it was like maybe it was a hacker group that's against world policy in movies? You know
Yeah.
what do you think? Do you think that the movie The Interview was? So you don't think that it was the movie The Interview that was the target? You think that there's something more to it?
I think they were
100%.
going for the
I
data.
agree with you.
Yeah.
I agree
I
with you.
think the movie was just what the media put out there.
Yeah.
Between the media and whoever the hacker was, they wanted to cover their tracks.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
the easiest way to do it was say, "Hey, we want you to cancel this movie." And they're going to ignore the rest of the information that's going.
I like the way you think. Um, so let's say this is North Korea. I want to know, could you get behind a cyber attack type of revenge as opposed to one involving invading land and using weaponry?
I guess for me, obviously, with my military background, my biggest issue with this is is that really going to ever be enough as a cyber attack? That, and how do we not know that information isn't much more dangerous and could take a lot more lives than, let's say, that? Because let's say they decide to leak CIA information
Right.
and a bunch of agents got killed because of that information getting leaked. It doesn't save any more lives, and it makes it harder for us to be able to do what we needed to do to get the information we needed other places. So for me, it's a big no, because one, it's not going to be enough for most countries to think about it as, oh well, cyber attack is revenge. Two, it's doesn't save lives. It's no different than an actual war, because let's say it's just a war of information. That information couldn't be deadly.
It's true.
I would say I would think it's like different scopes. I think it's one thing when data is being breached and people's privacy and everything's getting violated. But once you start sending human beings out and they're going out for either to hold territory or to just hold influence with it, I think that's a totally different area of it. Because it's one thing to be like, oh, over the internet, it's like, oh no, this happened, versus, hey, this is real world stuff now. And I think the difference in cost would be exponential as well. So I could see data breaches being a form of revenge, like, oh, if you got into us, we're going to do the same thing but go a step
Right.
further. But I think it's totally different when you start putting lives on the line.
Yeah. Something that I thought of when I was, when I came up with this question after, doing all this research, is if we were to start going towards cyber, like data breaching for revenge, like a cyber attack, it's not going for the people that we have the issue with. That's pretty much just going for the citizens of that nation.
Mm-hmm.
Like if we were to, I don't know, I'm conflicted on it because, it could save money, but at the same time, it's like, are we really bettering our nation? I don't know. It's an
No,
ethical
I
dilemma.
I see what you're saying. It's like, how much really are we gonna get out of this?
Yeah.
Type of thing.
It's like cool. We found out all your major cinema secrets.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah. Can you think of any other hacks similar to this one? Because there's been a lot of hacks like this.
I know Sony's just a similar Sony hack is when like the PS4
Yeah.
was a big hack, and so I think Sony's just a target because of just how large it is, how many people know about it, how much influence it holds over a
At
lot
least
of
back in
technology.
2014. Yeah.
Exactly,
2014. It was the Disney of 2014.
Exactly. So I think thinking just to like similar hacks, it's like, oh, they attacked Sony, but I think that's
Yeah.
just because Sony was 99%. It was harder to find something that Sony didn't own to hack than for them to do vice versa.
Kind of crazy to think like they're not totally relevant anymore.
Yeah, it's just trends.
I do also think that it comes down to, like, when the other Sony hack we were talking about, the PS4 hack, a lot of the information they got was individuals' credit card numbers and stuff. And it was just Sony, the PS4 and PlayStation Plus was just a lot more popular at the time than the Xbox's Game Pass or anything. And I don't even think at that time the Nintendo Switch wasn't even a thing at that point.
No, it was the
And it
Wii
was still
U,
the
I
Wii
think.
U, which did not have any kind of popularity.
It wasn't even an online platform.
Well, it did, but it was limited. It was very much like, if you're going to target something to try to make as much money as possible, why wouldn't you target Sony if you're going to hack a gaming system? Because they're just not as well protected. It's easier to get into that than, let's say, they're trying to hack into, let's say, Disney's company, where they're a massive company, but people have tried to hack them, so they very much protect their information as much as possible.
Yeah.
So I think that's where the differences lie, is Sony kind of got into the security thing a little too late, and it already had massive hacks by the time it did, so it lost a lot of people's kind of trust.
Yep. Yeah, I get you there. I have one in mind that I would like to just switch gears and get into it. I want to tell you guys about the Chase Bank hack. I don't know if you guys remember it at all.
Tell me a little bit about it. I'll see if I'll turn any gears.
Great transition. Here we go. All right. So back in the day, I believe, 2014, just like the Sony hack. Wall Street Journal News reported that hackers believed to be based in Russia or Eastern Europe breached the bank's network through the compromise of an employee's personal computer. From there, the hackers reportedly penetrated other banking systems, and an individual close to the investigation told this to the Wall Street Journal. Employees often use software to tap into corporate networks from home through that, Employees often use software to tap into corporate networks from home through what are known as virtual private networks. Chase reportedly has reset passwords used by every technology employee and disabled employee accounts that may have been compromised. Since discovering the intrusion, some 200 employees across JP Morgan's technology and cybersecurity teams have worked to examine data on more than 90 servers that were compromised. A core team led by Chase's chief operating officer, Matt Zames, oversaw the bank's breach response strategy, the paper reports. This is actually kind of crazy to think about because this is Chase Bank is like the bank. It's the one bank you pretty much see on every corner of every town in America. And so for it to be broken into just through one personal computer led to 200 employees across, like it's insane. So with that came a lot of, restructuring. A new law was put into place. So I'll talk about that really quick. Senator Edward J. Markey from Massachusetts, he co-authored the Personal Data Protection and Breach Accountability Act. And he says, the data breach at JP Morgan Chase is yet another example of how Americans' most sensitive personal information is in danger. It is time to pass legislation to protect Americans against these massive data breaches. I find this personally really interesting because, 50, 60 years ago, this wouldn't have been an issue. This is a non-issue. Nothing was, everything was physical copies. It wasn't heavily computerized the way it is today. So I find it really interesting how, as time went on and technology advanced, so did legislation. So now there's new laws put in place that wouldn't have even been thought of 50, 60 years ago. I do want to ask, are you convinced that the motive of this breach was to take people's money? Because it could have been a breach to show the weakness of the bank. So I want to know where your head is at for that.
I think so. If you target a bank, it's a lot of personal records and obviously financials. So I could totally see how it was money. But I also think it shows the weakness of the bank and that people shouldn't really put too much trust into their local governments and stuff like that. Like, the whole big scandal.
Oh yeah.
So I think I would say probably 50-50 of they're just trying to hit the jackpot in Chase Bank. If you go through this one employee who has connections through here, those connections can get you to this massive data warehouse of where all this electronic money is stored. But I also think it's to be don't put too much trust in the banks, keep people on their toes, keep the hysteria still relevant. And this was back in 2014. So I'd say it's 50-50 between money and just public influence.
Yeah, I could see that.
I kind of agree, but at the same time, we don't know what happened with that information that was data mined. It could have been taken and used to, let's say, be sold on the black market. Let's say it was individual social security cards or account numbers or card numbers. They could have sold that information and not even used it for their own personal gain to take money straight out, but sold that information further. So it could have just been exclusively to get paid, but it might not be them taking the money from people.
I get what you're saying.
I don't think if it was a breach to show the weakness of the banks, the individual probably would have come out with it afterwards and said, hey, I know what I was doing was wrong, but it was to show a point. So I think for me, it's hard to argue that it was just a breach to show the weakness of the bank. If that was your motive, why wouldn't you come out and say that was your motive?
Yeah.
Because then you'd say, hey, this is how I did it. This is what you need to do to fix it. Similar to what one of my hackers had done, where he figured out how his company was being hacked or could be hacked and changed it around to kind of make it better for them. Yeah. So I think personally it wasn't a sign of weakness. They were just in it for the information.
I get you. That's a good point. That's a really good point.
I like that.
Were you guys affected by it? Because I know, my parents, they pulled out of Chase Bank and went to Bank of America after that happened.
I'm pretty sure my family did the same thing, or at least took a majority of our savings out of Chase Bank because it was so controversial and it reached the public so quickly. So I wouldn't say it, it wasn't like, oh, all our money's gone with Chase Bank. It was just kind of, if it can get hacked once, what's stopping it from again? Exactly.
Yeah, I get you.
For me, it didn't affect me. I've been at Bank of America as long as I've had a bank. So thing didn't really affect me. I didn't even really know anyone using Chase at the time. So
Right. Okay. So do you feel safe banking with Chase now after hearing about this? Like, could you see yourself opening an account there?
I think it's something to always have in the back of your mind.
Yeah.
That like it's not 100% security anymore, and people are getting even more wise to target these banks. So I wouldn't say I would avoid the bank at all costs, but it would definitely something like, hey, just realize that if you go all in on this bank, you're not 100% safe.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I agree with that. It comes down to no bank is safe. It's not just Chase.
Mm-hmm.
Any bank can be hacked, and saying that Chase is less safe than any other bank isn't fair because that was 6 years ago. They could have learned from their mistakes and have amped up security, but at this time there weren't a lot of hackers going into data breaches and getting through how this individual did, where they went through somebody's personal computer into the banking system. So I think that's a whole. It opened a lot of banks' eyes. So, but you always have to be understanding that any bank can be hacked. It does not matter.
Yeah. It
It's been
stinks for
hacked
Chase.
before.
Like it stinks for Chase that it had to be them because
Mhm.
it could have easily been any of them. It's not like Chase could have predicted that it was going to happen. I mean, everyone has cybersecurity starting, and as soon as the internet comes around, but you can't say that one bank is better off than the other.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
I 100% agree. I think it also comes down to like when you're thinking about it, is they automatically are coming back from behind because that was a PR disaster.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
To have that means they probably had to get people to come back and to stop leaving. They had to give out extra money, give out loans at low interest rates.
Yeah.
Incentivizing everything.
Exactly, just to kind of keep themselves afloat.
It was actually
they
probably a
didn't
great
fall
time
apart.
to take out a loan. I'll have to look into that. That was
That would be
probably
great information because, like, that's a funny thing that people don't think about is when banks have issues, the things that individuals can get out of them
Yeah.
are better because they're like, oh, well, people are investing, so we're gonna incentivize.
It's probably the one time in history that Chase Bank needed the people more than the people needed the bank.
You're not wrong.
So do you fear our banks are in trouble with the advancement of technology since this huge breach? Like, will there be another one in the future?
I think the public will never know if our banking security systems will ever be up to par with like the hacker prowess and hacker technology, and only because how are we supposed to know what hackers are up to? It's not like a weekly newspaper. It's like, oh, a new breakthrough in hacking malware. They kind of have to put their best out, and if it's one update behind or 100 updates behind, we don't know.
Yeah.
So I think it's a race where you have where you're going, but you're completely blind to the other competition. So I think it's very difficult for banks to be like, we have updated our security and it's 100%, and it's so strong. Yeah, maybe it was like that a month ago, but if hacking malware is so advanced now that they can break through that, what's the point?
I 100% agree. I think
Yeah, I get
it
that.
literally comes down to, for a lot of these banks, is making sure you're not stagnant. Because when you stay stagnant, that's when the hackers are either going to catch up to you if they're behind, or they're going to leave you in the dust if they're already ahead.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Oh,
think
yeah.
that's an important thing that banks need to understand. And not even just banks, because it's your information also that you need to think about that people are hacking. Like, yeah, they're more likely to hack a bank than they are you. But let's say a small-time hacker who's trying to, for the first time, wants to hack your email just to see if they can do it, then you're at risk. So
Yeah.
I think always looking forward is a major factor to this. And to the second part of the question, will there be another in the future? Of course. Hackers are always going to try to push themselves. They're whether it be motivated by issues such as personal issues, wanting to prove that they can do it, wanting financial reasons, or anything like that. There will always be another hack coming, whether we know about it fully or not. That's a whole nother animal, but there will always be another hack because there will never be a foolproof way to guarantee that it can't get hacked, as Matt was saying.
Okay. Yeah. Well, another aspect of it though is like us protecting ourselves. Like change your passwords every 3 months. Change your PIN. Check on it.
It's funny you mentioned that too with the passwords. I've actually taken a few courses in college about changing passwords. And it wasn't something, I mean, if you go a few years down the road, or a few years back, I should say, and it's like, if you kept your password, like maybe switch a letter, do a number. Now, if you go to like a password generator, it will give you the wackiest, like special character, these things, and the technology that is a password cracker is absolutely crazy, and it's the fact that the public has to keep up with it. It's really scary too, because you got to think not everyone knows about it. If you
it's like we created a monster.
Exactly, like if you have older generations, they're not going to be changing their passwords on a weekly or monthly basis. They're probably going to have the one that they made in like 2000 that it doesn't even have numbers in, it's just a word of their dog or their cat or something. And those can get cracked in milliseconds. So I don't know, that's just me ranting. I thought funny you brought that up with the passwords.
It's a really good point. It's a really good point. It's an imperfect system and we created it. So do you think passing legislation would be efficient for all banks, or would each bank need to combat breaches on its own terms?
I would say for passing legislation for all banks, it wouldn't have to be like you download this software and do this. It would say you need a security system. You need to acknowledge that you might get, that there's
Right.
potential for you to get hacked. But then I would leave it up to the banks.
Yeah.
If a bank knows that it's very safe and they have a very update secure system, especially if they're a larger corporation, I think they should take that responsibility and put it in their own hands, because so that way they don't rely on the government, and that way that they pretty much, if you get hacked, it's kind of on you almost,
Yeah.
So the consequences don't stretch any further than yourself. And of course with smaller banks, they might not have the funding for it, but then again, they're probably a less target because they would have less money than larger corporations.
Yeah, that's true.
I'll agree to a point of what you said. I do 100% agree there needs to be kind of a blanket form of legislation requiring certain parts to be taken care of, especially like when it comes to security, saying you must have security, you must have insurance on, should this happen, you notify the people that are affected. I think that kind of thing does need to be addressed, especially because obviously so many places that have been hacked, they email out their customers saying, hey, this is what happened. You may have been affected. Watch your information. So I think it's been pretty widely. I don't know if it's actual legislation that they're required to do it, but it should be. And when it comes to bank, I think it very much is, because banks are going to deal with it in their own way. So I think you don't give them you give them a base outline, but don't force them. Because let's say you say, hey, everyone needs to use this software. Well, then hackers know, I just need to crack that software.
Exactly. Yeah, it gives them one thing to work on. It's a very good point. All right, guys. I think that's pretty much all the time we have here. It's been fun chatting with you two. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in to Half an Hour Hack. Tune in next week. Subscribe. We'll chat soon.
Have a good one, everyone.
Have a great night, guys. Stay safe.